What happens when a man's arrogance writes a check his life can't cash? In the sterile, silent theatre of a courtroom, a man named Marcus Thorne thought he was the director of his own life, about to deliver the final, crushing blow to his estranged wife. He was rich, powerful, and, in his mind, untouchable. But he forgot one crucial rule. You never know who is watching. He raised his hand for the whole world to see, but he never saw the one man sitting above them all, robed in black, whose judgment was about to become the hammer that shattered his entire world. The first thing people noticed about Marcus Thorne was his smile. It was a masterpiece of dentistry and charisma, a gleaming white flag of truce that promised wealth, security, and an entry into a world you only read about. The second thing they noticed was his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor Ellie Thorne was the perfect accessory. Beautiful, but in a quiet, unassuming way. She was the cashmere to his bespoke wool, the antique silver to his polished chrome. Their home in the rolling, manicured hills of Northwood, Connecticut, was a testament to his success. A stark, modern, glass and steel structure that magazines called brave, but which Ellie always found cold. From the outside, they were a power couple. Marcus, a self-made titan in private equity, and Ellie, the graceful homemaker and philanthropist, chairwoman of the local children's hospital charity ball. But inside the house on Sycamore Hill, the air was different. "Ellie, darling," Marcus would call, his voice echoing from the limestone foyer. He never shouted. He didn't need to. His voice was a silken leash. The catering service used the wrong goddamned font on the menus. Again. Ellie would leave her study, a small, sun-filled room he'd gifted her, and walk to the kitchen, her feet silent on the cold marble. "I'm sure it's fine, Marcus. It's just a font." He would look at her, not with anger, but with a deep, theatrical disappointment that was infinitely worse. "It's not just a font, Eleanor. It's an impression. It's a detail. And details are everything. It shows a lack of care. It makes me look like I don't care." "Is that what you want? For people to think I'm careless?" "No, Marcus, of course not." "Then fix it." He'd turn back to his phone, already absorbing himself in a hostile takeover of some Midwest manufacturing plant. He'd already forgotten her. This was their life, a life of perfect surfaces and chilling undercurrents. Ellie had been 23 when she met him. She was fresh from Vassar, an art history major with a rebellious streak against her stuffy family. Her family was old money from Boston, a lineage of lawyers and government men who valued protocol over passion. Marcus was a whirlwind. He was 35, divorced, and had an intoxicating aura of danger and ambition. He didn't care about her last name. He cared about her, or so she thought. "Your father?" He'd scoffed once, early in their relationship, after she'd mentioned her family's disapproval. "What's he do again?" "Some corporate lawyer." Ellie had hesitated. It was the perfect moment to tell him. "He's in the legal field. Very high-level government work. In Boston." "So a bureaucrat," Marcus had laughed, kissing her. "A man who pushes paper. I move paper, Ellie. I make things happen. Forget him. You're with me now." And she had. She'd let the lie of omission settle between them. Her father wasn't just in the legal field. He was Judge Arthur Vance, the presiding chief judge of the state superior court, a man whose name made governors tremble and lawyers break into a cold sweat. He was a lion of the law, but he was also a cold, distant father. A man who had, at her wedding, shaken Marcus's hand, looked him in the eye and said only, "You will find my daughter is more resilient than you know." Marcus had taken it as a compliment. Ellie had known it was a warning. She hadn't spoken to her father in 3 years. Not since her mother's funeral, where Marcus had spent the entire wake on his phone, closing a deal, and Arthur Vance had stared at him with such concentrated loathing that Ellie had to step between them. The estrangement suited Marcus. He wanted her isolated. He wanted to be her sun, her moon, and her entire sky. First, he'd suggested her friends were a bad influence. Then he'd worried about her working, insisting she focus on the brand, their brand. Now, 8 years later, the brand was crumbling. The final straw wasn't a misting or another woman. It was a simple, cold, black and white bank statement. Ellie had maintained a small, private account. It held the last of the inheritance from her mother. It was her money, her escape hatch, though she'd never admitted it. She'd been planning to use it to secretly fund a small art gallery for local artists. She went to withdraw funds for a deposit, and the bank teller, a young woman named Jessica with sympathetic eyes, had turned pale. "Mrs. Thorne, there seems to be a problem. The account was closed." "Closed? That's impossible. I'm the only signatory." The teller slid a piece of paper across the counter. "It was closed 3 days ago. The funds were transferred to a holding company. Thorne Global Holdings." Marcus. He hadn't asked. He hadn't told her. He had simply taken it. He had absorbed her last piece of independence into his own vast, unknowable empire. When she confronted him that night, the smile was gone. "It was just sitting there, Eleanor," he said, adjusting his $5,000 tie, not even looking at her. "Money needs to work. It was lazy money. Now it's working. For us. That was my money, Marcus. From my mother." He finally looked at her. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, were as flat and cold as the river in winter. "Everything you have is my money. Your house, your car, the clothes on your back. It's all mine. I made you. And you seem to be forgetting that." "I want a divorce," she whispered. The words tasted like ash and freedom. Marcus laughed, a short, sharp, barking sound. "A divorce? You? You can't even balance a checkbook, Ellie. You have no idea what a divorce is. You're filing? With what money? With what guts? You'll be back in a week, begging me to take you back." He turned and walked upstairs. The next morning, while he was at his gym, Eleanor Thorne packed one suitcase, called an Uber, and left the house on Sycamore Hill forever. She had $412 in her wallet, and the one thing Marcus couldn't take, her name. She didn't go to a hotel. She went to a small, walk-up apartment in the city's less fashionable district, to the office of Sarah Jenkins, Eskimo, a lawyer who worked on a sliding scale, whose website said, "Fighting for the spouses they thought were silent." When Sarah asked about assets, Ellie laid it all out. The house, the cars, the stocks, the offshore accounts she only suspected. "And your family?" Sarah asked, a kind-eyed woman in a worn cardigan. "Do you have any support?" Ellie looked out the window at the rain-streaked street. "My family is complicated. My father and I are estranged." "What's his name? What does he do?" Ellie took a deep breath. The lie she had told her husband was one thing, but the truth, she felt, was all she had left. "His name," she said, her voice shaking, "is Arthur Vance." Sarah Jenkins, who had passed the state bar by the skin of her teeth and knew all the local legal legends, dropped her pen. It clattered loudly on the desk. "Arthur Vance?" Sarah whispered. "As in, Judge Arthur Vance?" "He's my father," Ellie said, tears finally rolling down her cheeks. "And I think I'm in a terrible, terrible amount of trouble." The first volley from Marcus wasn't a cannonball. It was a glacier. It was the slow, crushing, and utterly silent freeze-out. The day after Ellie filed, she found her credit cards were declined. All of them. The American Express black, the Visa infinite, even the department store card for Bergdorf's. Cardholder not recognized. Her phone was next. She was in the middle of a strategy call with Sarah when the line went dead. Service disconnected. Marcus was dismantling her piece by piece. "He's cutting off her oxygen," Sarah Jenkins explained to her legal partner, a young, hungry associate named Ben, as they sat in their cramped office. "He's not just going for a win. He's going for annihilation. He wants her to crawl back, broken, before they even see a mediator." Sarah was smart. She'd immediately filed an ex parte motion for temporary support and legal fees. This was the hearing that was now on the docket. It was a simple, procedural hearing. But to Ellie, it felt like D-Day. Marcus, in the meantime, had hired the most ruthless legal team in the state: Davenport, Hayes, and Finch. The lead attorney, Richard "Rich" Davenport, was a man who saw divorce not as a legal dissolution, but as a corporate takeover. He was known for his silver hair, his shark-skin suits, and his absolute lack of a conscience. Davenport's first move was to paint Ellie as unstable. "My client, Mr. Thorne," Davenport stated in a motion to the court, "is deeply concerned for his wife's mental well-being. Her actions have been erratic, and this frivolous suit is a cry for help." The erratic actions were, of course, her leaving him. He'd even produced a concerned letter from his family doctor, suggesting Ellie was prone to bouts of hysteria and emotional imbalance. The next attack came from her friends. Caroline, the woman who had been her maid of honor, left her a voicemail. "Ellie, I don't know what's going on, but Marcus is he's a wreck. He's so worried about you. He told us you're not well. We all just want you to get the help you need. This lawyer you've hired, she's taking advantage of you, honey. Just come home." It was a campaign of psychological warfare. Marcus was an artist, and his masterpiece was her isolation. Ellie, living in a small, furnished, one-bedroom apartment Sarah had found for her, felt the walls closing in. She was a ghost in her own life. She'd see women on the street wearing the same Ellie uniform, the Lululemon, the Canada Goose jacket, the Balenciaga sneakers, and she felt like an alien. "How does he do it, Sarah?" she asked, huddled over a cup of tea in Sarah's office, the only place she felt safe. "How does he make everyone believe I'm the crazy one? He's the one who stole my inheritance." "He's a narcissist, Ellie," Sarah said, pushing a box of tissues toward her. "And a very good one. His entire world is built on his public perception. You're not just divorcing a man. You're attacking his brand. He will burn the village to the ground to save his own castle." "So what do? We fight back," Sarah said, her eyes hardening. "Not with his weapons, not with press leaks and smears, with the law. He stole your money. That's financial abuse. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. He thinks you're a porcelain doll. We're about to show him you're a wrecking ball." For the first time in a decade, Ellie felt a spark, not of hope, but of a cold, hard anger. "Good," Ellie said. "Let's wreck him." They began their discovery. Sarah's team, which was just Sarah and Ben, worked 20-hour days. They subpoenaed bank records, and they found it, the wire transfer, a single digital thread that led from Ellie's maternal trust to Thorne Global Holdings, and then, almost immediately, to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. "He didn't just invest it, Ellie," Sarah said, her voice grim. "He hid it. He was liquidating. He was preparing to leave you, and he was planning on taking everything." The realization hit Ellie like a physical blow. This wasn't just control. This was malice. He hadn't just been a bad husband, he'd been a con man. The hearing next week, Sarah said, is for temporary support. Davenport will argue you're a flight risk, that you're unstable. He'll try to get the judge to award you nothing. But we have this. She tapped the wire transfer record. This is our leverage. And what about my father? Ellie asked, the question hanging in the air. Sarah had been clear from the beginning. The Vance card is a nuke, Ellie. We don't use it unless we have to. If we use it, it taints everything. It looks like you're running to Daddy. It feeds Marcus's narrative that you can't stand on your own. We win this on the merits. We win this because you are right and he is wrong. Ellie nodded. On the merits, I like that. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office overlooking the harbour, Richard Davenport was prepping his own client. She's got nothing, Marcus, Davenport said, leaning back in his Eames chair. A bottom-feeder lawyer, a sob story, and no cash. We're going to walk into that hearing. I'm going to paint her as a gold-digging, unstable trophy wife, and the judge will give her bus fare. We'll offer her a nuisance settlement. 50,000. She'll take it. Marcus swirled the ice in his scotch. I don't want to give her 50,000. I want her to pay. She humiliated me. She left me. And she will, Davenport said with a shark's smile. But we have to play the game. By the way, my researchers dug into her family. The Vances. You were right. Old Boston money. Father's a partner at some white shoe law firm. Nothing we can't handle. They're all paper tigers. Marcus took a sip. A lawyer? I knew it. A stuffy old man. He probably hates me. Who cares if he hates you? He's a civilian. He has no power in a courtroom. I have the power. You have the money. That's all that matters. Now let's go over your testimony. When you talk about her, I want you to look concerned. Can you do concerned? Marcus Thorne gave his lawyer the $1 million smile that had charmed Ellie and 100 investors before her. Richard, he said, I can do anything. The night before the hearing, Ellie couldn't sleep. The small apartment felt like a cage. She was pacing the floor, rereading the affidavit from Marcus, her stomach in knots. The concerned tone was so perfectly crafted, it almost made her doubt her own sanity. Eleanor has always had a fragile disposition. I've spent our marriage protecting her from the world and from herself. He made her sound like a Victorian invalid. The rage was so potent it made her dizzy. She picked up her burner phone, and before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed a number she knew by heart, a number she hadn't called in 3 years. It rang 4 times, and she was about to hang up when a gruff, familiar voice answered. Not a hello, but a sharp, yes? Dad, Ellie whispered. Silence on the other end. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the static on the line, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. Eleanor, Judge Arthur Vance finally said. His voice was like gravel and old books. I'm sorry to call so late, she said, her voice small. It's 9 p.m., he replied. The Court of Appeals is still in session. It's not late. Of course. For him, late was 3 a.m. I'm in trouble, Dad. The words tumbled out, desperate. I've left Marcus. I'm divorcing him. And he's awful. He's lying. He's stealing. He's trying to destroy me. Another long pause. Ellie could picture him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books, a portrait of her mother on his desk, his face an unreadable mask. I see, he said. You see? That's it. I see. Ellie's desperation turned to fire. The old, familiar frustration. I'm telling you my life is falling apart, and that's all you have. What would you like me to have, Eleanor? His voice was low, but it had a judge's carrying power. Would you like me to say, I told you so? Would you like me to list the half-dozen times I tried to warn you about that man? He's not a man, she snapped. He's a monster. And you just pushed me toward him. Every time you criticized him, every time you looked at him with that disgust, you just made me want to prove you wrong. And so you have, he said, and the words, though quiet, cut her to the bone. You have proven me wrong. You proved you were tougher than I thought. You married him. You stayed with him for 8 years. You endured him. And now you are leaving him. You are doing it. So why are you calling me? Ellie collapsed onto the sofa, the fight draining out of her. Because I'm scared, she whispered. He's so powerful. His lawyers they're calling me crazy. He froze all my accounts. He stole my inheritance. We have a hearing tomorrow for temporary support, and my lawyer, she's good, but he's just going to crush us. Your lawyer, Arthur said. Sarah Jenkins. Yes, I've heard of her. Scrappy, inelegant, but moral. A rare combination. Ellie was stunned. You know about her? It is my business to know the bar, Eleanor. Just as it was my business to know that your husband's company was being quietly investigated by the SEC. Just as it was my business to know he was liquidating assets 3 months ago. Ellie's blood ran cold. You knew? You knew he was a criminal? You knew he was stealing from me? I suspected, Arthur corrected. I cannot act on suspicion. I am a man of the law. I cannot and will not interfere in your life. You made it very clear you wanted me out of it. The pain in his voice was raw, undisguised for the first time. I have wanted to call you every day for 3 years, every single day. But it would not be me you were answering to, it would be him. And I would not give him the satisfaction of turning my own daughter against me any further. He took a deep, shaky breath. You are in a fight. You have a good lawyer. You have the truth on your side. That is more than most people have. You will go into that courtroom tomorrow. You will stand tall. You will let Miss Jenkins speak, and you will trust in the process. Trust in the process? Ellie scoffed. Marcus owns the process. No one, Judge Vance said, and his voice was suddenly no longer her father's, but the voice of the law, owns the process. It is bigger than him. It is bigger than me. Go to court. Be brave. I have taught you how to be brave. I love you, Dad, she whispered. I am aware of that, Eleanor, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. Now get some sleep. You have a big day. The line clicked. Ellie sat in the dark, stunned. He knew. He'd all known. And he'd let her fight her own battle. He hadn't rescued her. He was trusting her. The realization was more strengthening than a dozen-strong legal team. He hadn't told her so. He'd told her to be brave. She went to bed and, for the first time in months, slept soundly. The next morning, the air in the Hon. Robert M. Harrison State Courthouse was thick with the smell of floor wax, anxiety, and stale coffee. Courtroom 3B was a family courtroom, which meant it was designed to be softer, wood paneling instead of marble, blue carpet instead of tile. But to Ellie, it felt like a gladiator's arena. She sat next to Sarah Jenkins at the plaintiff's table. Sarah was a fortress of calm in her best and only navy blue suit. Ellie felt exposed, her hands shaking so hard she had to clasp them in her lap. Then he entered. Marcus Thorne didn't just walk into a room, he conquered it. He was flanked by Richard Davenport and 2 junior associates, all of them looking like a casting call for a legal drama. Marcus was in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfect, a look of profound, concerned sadness on his handsome face. He made a point of looking at Ellie, his eyes full of pity, and she had to physically restrain herself from flinching. He was a performer, and this was his stage. He even had a reporter with him, a local society blogger named Tiffany, who he'd reluctantly allowed to come to see the truth. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice booming. Everyone stood. The door to the chambers opened. The Honourable Judge, Arthur Vance, presiding. Ellie's heart stopped. It wasn't a thump, it was a seizure. The blood drained from her head so fast the room tilted. No. No. This wasn't possible. This was a family court hearing. He was a superior court judge. He didn't do temporary support hearings. He handled appeals, complex litigation, murders. What was he doing here? She looked at Sarah, whose face was ashen. Sarah was a good lawyer, but she was a local. She knew Judge Vance by reputation only. She had no idea. And then Ellie looked at Marcus. He was checking his watch. He hadn't made the connection. Vance was a common name. To Marcus, this was just another old man in a robe, a cog in the machine he was about to grease. Judge Arthur Vance strode to the bench, his black robes billowing. He was an imposing man, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to have seen every lie humanity had to offer. He sat, and the room sat with him. He looked at the docket in front of him. Case 304B, Thorne versus Thorne, a motion for temporary support. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room, and he froze. His gaze locked on Eleanor. It was not the gaze of a father. It was the gaze of a judge who has just realized his entire courtroom is a landmine. His face, for a fraction of a second, registered pure, unadulterated shock. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by an iron mask of judicial impartiality. He looked at the plaintiff's table, at Eleanor, at Sarah. He looked at the defendant's table, at the smirking, confident Marcus. And Ellie understood. He hadn't known. This was a last-minute schedule change. A judge had called in sick, and he had been assigned the overflow docket. He was just as blindsided as she was. This was a disaster. Sarah Jenkins, to her credit, was on her feet before Ellie could even process the next thought. "Your Honor," Sarah's voice was shaking, but she stood tall. "Plaintiff's counsel, we must immediately, and with the utmost respect, request a recusal." Richard Davenport shot up. "Objection, Your Honor. On what grounds? A desperate, last-minute attempt to delay the inevitable? Miss Jenkins is clearly out of her depth." Judge Vance raised one hand. Silence fell. Absolute silence. He stared at Sarah. "State your conflict, Counselor, and be very precise." This was the moment. Ellie felt Marcus's gaze on her, sharp and curious. He was annoyed by the delay, not understanding the implications. Sarah took a deep breath. "Your Honor, the plaintiff, my client, Mrs. Eleanor. Eleanor Vance Thorne." She paused. The air was so thick Ellie couldn't breathe. "She is your daughter, sir." Kathum. The sound in the courtroom was not a gasp. It was a collective, psychic explosion. The society blogger, Tiffany, dropped her phone. Davenport's jaw physically unhinged, but all of it was background noise to the look on one man's face. Marcus Thorne. His head snapped, swiveled. He looked at Ellie, his face a mask of confusion. "Vance," he whispered, the name foreign. Then he looked at the man on the bench, the powerful, imposing judge. Judge Arthur Vance. He looked back at Ellie, back at the judge. The blood didn't drain from his face. It fled. He went a shade of white that Ellie had never seen on a living person. The smugness, the confidence, the concern. It all evaporated, stripped away in a single, horrifying instant. He'd been playing chess, and he'd just realized he was on a battlefield, surrounded by tanks, and his opponent was the general. "You," he whispered at Ellie. His lips were pale. Judge Vance slammed his gavel. The crack was like a gunshot. "Counsel will approach the bench," he roared. His voice was thunder. "Now!" Sarah and a shell-shocked Richard Davenport scrambled forward. Marcus was frozen, still standing, his eyes locked on his wife with a look of such utter betrayal and rage that Ellie felt a genuine bolt of fear. "This hearing is suspended," Judge Vance declared, his voice ringing with fury. "Miss Jenkins, your motion for recusal is obviously granted. This case will be reassigned. This court is in recess." He banged the gavel again. "We are concluded." He stood, his robes swirling, and stormed off the bench, disappearing into his chambers without a backward glance. The courtroom exploded. The blogger was scrambling for her phone. Davenport was sputtering. Marcus, sit down," Davenport hissed, tugging at his client's sleeve. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at Ellie. His entire life, his entire con, was built on his supreme intelligence, his ability to read a room, to know the players, and he had just been revealed as the biggest fool in the state. He had married the daughter of the most powerful judge in the state, and he had never even known. He had abused her, stolen from her, and dragged her into a public court, planning to humiliate her in front of her father. "You," he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. He started walking toward her. "Sarah," Ellie whispered, shrinking back. "Bailiff," Sarah called out. "You set me up," Marcus snarled, ignoring his lawyer. He was closing the distance, his face a grotesque mask of fury. "You manipulative, lying—" He was right in front of her now. The bailiff, an older man named Peterson, was starting to move, but he was too slow. "You think your daddy is going to save you?" Marcus screamed. He was completely unhinged. The mask was off. The monster was free. "You are nothing!" And with all the force in his body, Marcus Thorne swung his open hand. Time did not slow down. It shattered. The sound was the first thing. A sharp, ugly crack that was nothing like a gavel. It was wet and brutal. It echoed off the wood paneling of courtroom 3B, a sound so shocking it seemed to suck all the air from the room. Ellie stumbled backward, her head snapping to the side from the force. The pain was immediate, a white-hot explosion on her left cheek. She tripped over her chair and fell, landing hard on the carpet, her ears ringing. For one deafening second, there was no other sound. The bailiff, Peterson, had his hand on his taser, his eyes wide. Sarah Jenkins was screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God." Richard Davenport had his hands over his face, as if he could unsee what his client had just done. The society blogger was frozen, but her phone was not. It was up, and it was recording. Marcus stood there, his arm still slightly extended, his chest heaving. His handsome face was contorted into a mask of pure, primal rage. He looked down at Ellie, crumpled on the floor, and for a second, a flash of satisfaction crossed his features. He had finally, physically, put her in her place. And then a new sound entered the room. It was not a roar. It was the sound of a mountain breaking. "Bailiff!" The voice didn't come from the hallway. It came from the bench. Judge Arthur Vance had not gone to his chambers. He had stopped just inside the doorway to gather his thoughts, to control his own rage at the situation. And he had seen it. He had seen it all. He emerged from the doorway, his face no longer the mask of a judge, but the crimson, apoplectic visage of a father. He wasn't wearing his robes. He'd shrugged them off. He was just a man in a white shirt and a tie, but he had never looked more powerful. "Seize that man!" he bellowed. Peterson, the bailiff, didn't need to be told twice. He and another officer who had been in the hall converged on Marcus. "Get your hands off me!" Marcus yelled, suddenly snapping back to reality, realizing the catastrophic error he had made. "Marcus Thorne," Peterson said, grabbing his arm in a joint lock. "You are under arrest." "For what?" Marcus screamed, struggling. "She's a liar! For assault!" Judge Vance roared, stepping down from the dais. This was a breach of every protocol, but he didn't care. He walked not to Ellie, but straight toward Marcus, who was now being slammed face first onto the defendant's table. "You strike a woman! In a courtroom!" Vance's voice was low and shaking with a fury so profound it was terrifying. "You strike her in this house?" "You're not the judge anymore, old man," Marcus spat, his face pressed into the wood. "You recused yourself. You have no power here." It was a stupid, desperate taunt, and it was the wrong one. Judge Vance stopped, 2 feet from him. He looked at the bailiffs. "Add contempt of court to the charges, and assaulting an officer. I'm sure he'll resist." "I'm not resisting," Marcus shrieked as the cuffs clicked shut. Vance ignored him. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and finally, looked at his daughter. Ellie was still on the floor, being helped up by a tearful Sarah Jenkins. Her cheek was already swelling, a raw red handprint. She was crying silently, not from the pain, but from the humiliation, the sheer, naked violence of it. Arthur Vance walked over to her. The entire courtroom, the lawyers, the other defendants, the blogger, was silent, watching this unbelievable drama unfold. He knelt. It was not a graceful movement. He was an old lion and his knees cracked. He knelt on the state-issued carpet in his expensive suit, and he looked at his daughter. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was raw, broken. "Dad," she whispered, and the word was a dam breaking. The sobs she'd been holding back ripped out of her. He didn't hug her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her face, his eyes tracing the red mark. "Miss Jenkins," he said, not taking his eyes off Ellie. "Yes, Judge?" "Yes, Your Honor." Sarah was fumbling, digging in her purse for a tissue. "Get your client to a hospital. Get her photographed. Get a medical report. I want a full, detailed police report filed. I want a restraining order filed before 5 p.m. "Yes, sir." And then he looked at Richard Davenport, who was a pale, sweating mess. "You call your office and you tell them to start dissolving your partnership with Mr. Thorne, because his life, as he knows it, is over." He turned back to Ellie. He reached out, not with his hand, but with his words. "You are safe. Do you understand me, Eleanor? It's over. You are safe now." Marcus, being dragged out by the bailiffs, heard this. He writhed, a final, desperate act of defiance. "You'll never be safe from me, Ellie," he screamed, his voice echoing down the hall. "You're mine. You'll always be mine." Judge Arthur Vance stood up. He watched his daughter's abuser be dragged away, and then he looked at the bailiff remaining. "Peterson," he said. "Yes, Judge?" "Make sure he's in general holding. I want him to enjoy the full accommodations of the Harrison courthouse, and he gets one phone call to his lawyer, no one else. He is on suicide watch, effective immediately." "Sir?" Peterson was confused. "He doesn't seem suicidal." "He's not," Judge Vance said, his voice as cold as a morgue. "But it ensures he's in an isolated cell with no privileges and is checked on every 15 minutes. It will be a long night for Mr. Thorne. See to it." He turned, straightened his tie, and walked back to his chambers, leaving a shattered courtroom, a ruined career, and his broken daughter in his wake. The explosion was immediate, before Ellie had even left the hospital, with a diagnosis of a fractured zygomatic arch, her cheekbone, and a severe concussion, the story was the lead item on every local news website. The Society blogger, Tiffany, hadn't just posted. She had live-streamed the aftermath. The video was shaky, chaotic, and utterly damning. It had no audio of the slap, just the screams after. But it had crystal-clear video of Marcus Thorne, his face purple with rage, being slammed onto the table. It had Ellie on the floor, crying, and it had the thunderous, furious arrival of Judge Arthur Vance. The headline wrote itself, "Local Tycoon. Marcus Thorne attacks wife in court in front of judge father-in-law." By 6 p.m. it wasn't a local story. It was national. The Associated Press, Reuters, even the New York Times picked it up. The slap heard round the state became a trending hashtag. Marcus Thorne's entire, carefully constructed world imploded in the space of 3 hours. 7:08 p.m., Richard Davenport's firm, Davenport, Hayes and Finch, issued a one-sentence press release. As of 4:00 p.m. today, Marcus Thorne and Thorne Global Holdings are no longer clients of this firm. We have no further comment. Davenport had quit, citing irreparable ethical conflict. 8:00 p.m. The board of directors of Thorne Global Holdings announced an emergency session. 9:00 p.m. Marcus Thorne was, after 8 agonizing hours in a cold concrete cell, released on $500,000 bond, which he'd had to secure through a bail bondsman at an exorbitant rate. He was met on the courthouse steps by a flash mob of news cameras, screaming questions. He looked stunned, pale, and for the first time in his life, small. He said nothing, climbing into a waiting town car. 10:00 p.m. The SEC, which Judge Vance had mentioned was quietly investigating, announced it was formally escalating its probe into Thorne Global, citing recent events that call into question the stability and character of its CEO. Marcus wasn't just ruined, he was radioactive. Ellie, meanwhile, was not at a hotel. She was at a location so secure no one would ever think to look for her. She was in her childhood bedroom. After the hospital, Sarah had driven her to a quiet, tree-lined street in the oldest, most exclusive part of Boston. The car had pulled up to a stone and brick garrison, a house that looked more like a small fortress than a home. Arthur Vance had been waiting on the steps, the porch light illuminating him. He wasn't in a suit. He was in a worn navy blue cardigan and slippers. He looked, simply, like a dad. He had opened the car door for Ellie. She'd gotten out, the painkillers making her feel floaty, her face a Picasso of purple and black swelling. They stood on the porch for a moment. She started. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he said, his voice thick. He opened the front door. Welcome home, Eleanor. He'd shown her to her old room. It was unchanged, the same Vasa pennant on the wall, the same 4-poster bed, the same smell of lemon oil and old books. I'll have Maria bring you some soup, he said, lingering in the doorway. Dad? He stopped. Thank you, she said. He nodded, unable to speak, and gently closed the door. She slept for 12 hours. When she woke, the house was silent. She found him in the study, the same room he'd been in when she called him. He was on the phone. I don't care what his motion says, he was saying, his voice a low growl. You counterfile. He's a flight risk. He's a violent offender. I want an ankle monitor on him by noon. Yes, I'm aware of my position. This is not a request. This is a father. Thank you, Sarah. You're doing fine work. He hung up and saw Ellie standing in the doorway. He looked tired. That was Sarah, he said. I heard, Ellie said, walking in. She sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. You're interfering. Yes, he said, without apology. I am. I spent a decade honoring the process while that animal systematically destroyed my daughter. The process failed. My adherence to it failed. I am done failing." "You didn't fail me, Dad," Ellie said, the words catching in her throat. "I pushed you away. I was so stupid. I was so desperate to be not your daughter, not Judge Vance's little girl. I wanted to be my own person. I wanted to be loved for me." "And you found a man who loved nothing," Arthur said, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "He didn't love you, Ellie. He acquired you. And when you were no longer a complaint, obedient acquisition, he tried to break you." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens his wife had planted. "The day you married him, I came back here. Your mother was already sick. She said to me, 'Arthur, you have to let her go. You have to let her make her own mistakes. It's the only way she'll find out how strong she is.' He turned to face her. And I hated it. I hated him. I saw the rot in him from the first handshake, the emptiness. But I listened to your mother. I let you go. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than any case. Harder than any verdict." "Why did he hate me so much?" Ellie whispered, the question that had plagued her for years. "Why wasn't I enough?" "Oh, Eleanor," Arthur said, and for the first time she saw tears in her father's eyes. He crossed the room and sat on the ottoman in front of her, taking her hands. They were cold. "You were too much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were too kind, too smart, too good. You had a light in you, a moral compass you got from your mother. He has none. He saw your light, and his first, only instinct was to snuff it out, because his own darkness couldn't bear the comparison." He squeezed her hands. "He didn't hate you, my girl. He envied you, and he tried to poison what he envied, but he failed. He hit me," she sobbed, the trauma of it all crashing down. "In front of everyone, he hit me." "Yes, he did," Arthur said, his voice hardening again. "And in doing so, he gave us the one thing we never had. He gave us a witness. He gave the world the truth. He wrote his own confession on your face, and he signed it in a courtroom, and for that, he will be punished." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, standing up, "you heal, and I make a few phone calls." The wheels of justice, which had been so slow to turn for Ellie, now spun with the speed and ferocity of a buzzsaw for Marcus. The divorce, which Marcus had planned to drag out for years, was over in 6 weeks. Faced with overwhelming video evidence of assault, a criminal trial, and the SEI's now full-blown investigation, which Ellie's wire transfer records had unlocked, Marcus had no leverage. His new lawyer, a harried public defender, his private assets were frozen, advised him to take the deal. Ellie got everything. She got the house on Sycamore Hill, which she immediately listed for sale. She got the contents of the Cayman Islands account, which the SEC, with an assist from Judge Vance's friends at the Justice Department, had located. She got her mother's inheritance back, plus interest. She got 100% of Marcus's remaining non-fraudulent assets. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday. Marcus wasn't even there. He signed the papers from a holding cell. His criminal trial was a media circus. It lasted 1 day. The prosecution's case was simple. They played the video. They entered the hospital photos into evidence. They had the testimony of 2 bailiffs, Richard Davenport, who testified against his former client, and Sarah Jenkins. Marcus's defense was that he'd been under emotional duress, that the shock of his wife's parentage had caused a temporary, regrettable lapse in judgment. The jury, composed of 8 women and 4 men, deliberated for 15 minutes. Guilty on all counts: assault, battery, contempt of court. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Ellie was there, in the front row, sitting between Sarah and her father. Arthur Vance was not on the bench. He was in the gallery, as a citizen, as a father. Marcus was brought in. He was a shell of the man he'd been. He'd lost £30. His $5,000 suit was replaced by an ill-fitting one his public defender had procured. His golden tan was gone, replaced by a sallow, prison grey. He looked at Ellie. His eyes were no longer full of rage. They were just empty. He had become what he'd always been inside. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Maria Rodriguez, looked down at him. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice sharp. "You were a man of power and privilege. You had everything, and you used that power to terrorize, to abuse, and to control. You did not just strike your wife. You struck the very idea of decency. You did it in a house of law, believing you were the law. You were wrong. I have read the letters. From your former business partners, from your friends. They all say the same thing, that this was out of character. But the evidence suggests this is your character." She sentenced him to the maximum, 3 years in state prison, not probation, not anger management. Hard time. Marcus Thorne collapsed. His lawyer had to hold him up. As he was led away, he looked back, one last time, at Ellie. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just looked at him. She saw him, a small, pathetic, empty man. He was gone. Outside the courthouse, Ellie and Sarah stood on the steps, surrounded by the same cameras that had hounded Marcus. "Ellie! Ellie, how do you feel?" "Any comment, Mrs. Thorne?" Ellie stepped up to the microphones. Sarah had told her to say, "No comment." But her father had taught her something else. "My name," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is Eleanor Vance. I am not Mrs. Thorne. Today, justice was served. But for the millions of women who are in the same position I was, whose abusers are not foolish enough to do it in a courtroom, our work is not done. This is not just my story. It's their story, and I will not be silent anymore." She turned, and her father was waiting by the car. He had the proudest smile she had ever seen. He opened the door for her, and she got in. 1 year later. The house on Sycamore Hill was sold. The proceeds were used to create the Vance Fund, a non-profit run by Sarah Jenkins, dedicated to providing high-level legal defense for victims of domestic financial abuse. Eleanor Vance, having re-enrolled at Vassar, was finishing her master's degree. She was applying to law schools. She was having lunch at a small cafe in Boston when her father, Arthur, joined her. He was in a sweater. He'd retired 6 months after the trial. "Figured I'd find you here," he said, sitting down. "Hi, Dad," she smiled. "You're early." "I'm retired," he said. "I'm always early." "What's that you're reading?" She held up the textbook. "Torts. Figured I should get a head start." "Good, good." He looked at his daughter. Her cheek had healed. There was no scar, but she was different. The fear was gone, the hesitance. She was, he realized, the woman his wife had always known she would be. "I'm proud of you, Eleanor," he said. "I know, Dad," she said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I am too." The courtroom is a stage, but in the end, real life delivers the most powerful drama. Marcus Thorne thought his power and his money made him the judge, jury, and executioner in his own marriage. But he forgot that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always finds its way to the light, sometimes in the most explosive way possible. He built his kingdom on lies and control, but it all came crashing down with a single arrogant slap. What did you think of Marcus's reckoning? Was his sentence fair? What would you have done if you were in Ellie's shoes? This story is a reminder that the person who seems the most polished on the outside is often the most broken within. Thank you for joining us for this gripping, real-life drama. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story of justice, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have so many more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one.